Welcome to Soul of Travel podcast. Today I get to sit down with Allison Sodha, who is the president of Sodha Travel and also recently the author of Go Girl Guides India. And I'm so excited for us to get to sit down. We were just having a pre-interview chat and we have spent a lot of time together in the virtual space, but never one-on-one. So this is really fun to get to do this. And I just can't wait to share your story with our listeners. So welcome to the podcast, Allison.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to share space.
Thank you. Well, to begin, I would love for you just to briefly introduce yourself and let our listeners know who you are in the space of travel right now.
Yes, so namaste, everyone. My name is Allison, and as Christine mentioned, I'm the president of Sodha Travel and the author of Go Girl Guides India. And my specialty is in curating and researching the impact of travel from a sustainable and regenerative place on the landscape of South Asia, particularly the Indian subcontinent. And yes, and I look forward to having this engaging dialogue about how things are shifting in this part of the world.
Excellent. Thank you. As you were just saying, only those 3 sentences, I was like, oh, there's like 5 more things I want to add to the list of what we already have planned to talk about, but I'm sure it will all kind of fold into the conversation. To start, I would love to just get an understanding of when you first began exploring the world. I know that you were an early traveler, and then also kind of understand how you developed such an affinity for India and really began to focus your business in that area.
Sure. So my father was a pilot. And so I grew up very fortunate to travel the world. So I had the travel bug very early on, took my first flight at 4 months old. And from there, it's just been an absolute journey. I always had an affinity for India growing up, even though I never actually visited the country. I think part of this was probably from my mom, who had a deep connection to the Deepak Chopra Center. She was a meditation instructor. And so as I was growing up, I would learn a lot about the meaning of Ayurveda and what that meant, holistic health. Meditation, of course, we learned meditation. I learned meditation at the age of 9. And I would go with her at times to the Chopra Center in California to participate and observe. And so I was very fascinated by these topics, especially growing up in the Deep South in Atlanta, Georgia. It was really not something that was a part of my environment. And so when I went to school at the University of Colorado Boulder, I decided to make that my course of study. And so I studied Indian religion and history. And some of my favorite courses were Foundations of Hinduism and Buddhist elements and Tantra, and really understanding the disconnect and connect between the religions and the footprint that they've left in the landscape. And so after college, what do you really do with that degree, right? Most people assumed I would go on to perhaps teach, but instead I decided to finally make my first trip to India and to start writing for various publications. I started writing for Little India magazine, and my travels would really take me beyond, at that point, what was the well-traveled path in India. The same big bus tours, the same destinations. And I found that there was so much magic in these areas of the country that were not being developed or really even introduced to travelers. And so through time, as I continued my research and my writing, I decided that my purpose was going to start a travel company that really focused on this part of the world and introducing these destinations and the people and the communities to travelers that were at that time not in a guidebook, right? And that was something that I felt was really important. As someone who had the opportunity to travel a lot, I found that so many of my most memorable moments were when the ones that were unplanned, unscheduled, not necessarily the highlights, right? And so I wanted to try to curate and cultivate that experience for others. And that's what led to me starting Sodha Travel.
Oh my goodness. I feel like so many parallels. And this is also so unusual for me in that I really know none of your backstory. Normally I like research a little bit more, and I was like, because I know we've shared space, I just trust that it's going to be aligned, and I'm not even going to do that. And so I love that. I just learned so much, but I grew up in rural Montana and I had a lot of similar interests, but zero exposure to it. I just found myself really gravitating toward anything that felt more like, um, traditional healing or I was very curious about world religions as well, and really wanted to explore that. And through some of my studies, also found myself drawn to that. So I love that we had like maybe some
Yeah.
similar things of curiosity, and also thinking about you learning about meditation and some of these practices and experiences when you were so young. I've shared that very much with my daughters now,
Mhm.
and they don't even like it's I love that it's such a part of their life. They're like, oh, mom's meditating, or oh, I'm feeling really frustrated, I probably should do a breathing exercise. And it's
Love that.
so cool to see like how different their experience is because of that. So I love that you had that so much a part of your life growing up. I feel like that's such a unique thing. And now it really makes sense why you were so drawn to that region. I also love how you shared that, you began traveling in India, doing the more traditional tours, but noticed what was missed, and then had the awareness that the things that meant so much to you were those intimate connections and getting out and exploring. And for me, that was similar. Like when I wanted to start at Lotus Sojourns, I thought like, what are the stories I tell over and over and over? Like when I
Yeah.
speak about travel, what gets me excited? And it's
Right.
always like the story of the time I sat with this one woman and she told me about, this thing, and we really connected. And for me also, like I can't remember if we were speaking English or if we had a translator or whatever, because it's just so it's so amazing to connect in that way. So
Yeah.
I love all of those things that you shared. And I love that that's how you want to bring people into India and share the
Yeah.
travel experiences with them.
Yes, thank you. I know, I feel like often that those experiences, like you said, the conversation, it goes beyond language, right? It goes beyond anything we could think of at an intellectual level. There's something so much deeper about that moment. And I always feel like there's something greater than us that's bringing that together. There's some meaning behind it,
Mm.
and it's so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love also, I mean, so I have not been to India either. And it's one of those places I have felt very drawn since I was young. Like I have watched so many films from India. I've read so many books by authors, and I don't know why, like I keep feeling that same connection. And I think maybe it is that sense of like, I feel for me, I feel like that sense of spirituality, and that there's just something that lives there differently than it lives in the US. And I think maybe that's why, like, I feel like when I go there, some aha will happen.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm really excited.
It's so common, and I love to hear you say that, because something that we communicate to our clients often is we're going through this intake process and really get to know them. Not there's not one itinerary of ours in the last 17 years that's been the same. And we really strive to cultivate very unique and personalized journeys. And through those conversations, I learned so much about the other people. And when they come back, something that we often hear from our travelers, which just fills my cup and my soul, is always about, I've been transformed, but I don't know how yet. It takes some time almost to reintegrate in society after visiting India. And we often either don't hear from clients for a while. They say something where I feel changed. There's something within me that's been sparked, but I need to get my footing. I need to figure out what that is I'm back now in this world, in this energy, in this reality, right? Because there is something that's just overwhelmingly powerful about that part of the world. Some people believe it's an energy vortex. Some people believe it's just the collective energy of the people and the culture. However you want to define it, I do believe that there's something that really transcends all words and affects people very personally when they take a journey to India.
Mm. I think also I love that idea of how to think about transformation. That's something I talk a lot about, is the transformational power of travel. And a lot of conversations happen around, fear of transformation or the discomfort of transformation. And I love how you just shared, and this is how I think about it too, is that transformation isn't like this like switch. It's not that
Yeah.
you're going to go on a transformational travel experience and like immediately like evolve into a new being, but it's like this little thing that is ignited, and it might even just be a shift in your perception of yourself, or a shift in your perception of your place in the world. And like you said, it's something then just kind of starts to bloom, and you don't even know until maybe years later that you've had this transformation, because it takes a while to integrate it. So
Yeah.
I think that's so amazing. And I hope that people listening can really kind of take that with them. And I think it also lowers the expectation for a trip to have this big
Mm.
boom in the
Mhm.
moment,
Mhm.
because a lot of times I think it's like 5 years later you'll reflect and you're like, oh, that's where this came from,
That's
and
right.
now you can see how it has become a part of your life.
I agree. Something that my dear friend who traveled with me on my first, when we first went to India, we went together. She was also a student of Indian religion. Her focus was Buddhism, mine was Hinduism. And when we took this journey after we came back, I felt like this just said it all, really. She went back to work. We were both in this space of, wow, we feel like our life has been transformed. There's something now, there's a greater purpose. We are rethinking how we are meant to live this life, and what is the best way to do it where we can serve others. And she had returned to her job, and a few days later a colleague asked her, she said, how was your trip, how was your experience? And she asked her, and she said, it's funny, she said, you look so much taller. And my friend, without missing a beat, looked at her and she said, no, I'm not taller, but my life has been elevated. And I just always think about that, because after that, she left the job, she left a relationship. She really went on a completely different path in her life that has brought her tremendous joy. Um, but there's an elevation of spirit.
Mm. Oh, it's so good. Oh my goodness. I feel like I just want to sit with that moment of conversation for a while. Um, yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I know that in your designs, you talked a little bit about the consultations that go in before to really craft each trip for someone. But I know that socially conscious itineraries and focusing on how your travel can impact positively a destination are things that are really important to you. How do you feel that that enhances the traveler experience as well? Because I feel like when you make those investments in community, you are
Mhm.
actually creating a better space for your travelers. But I'd love to hear what socially conscious means to you and why that's so important.
Well, I've always believed in this idea of people first, environment first. We're all connected, I believe. And so there's an authenticity to that. And when our clients, we call them our soda travelers, when they're experiencing a trip with us and they have this immersion and they're engaging with these communities, they can recognize on an almost an intrinsic level that it is authentic. This isn't something that's staged. It isn't something we're trying to do to get a dollar. We're not trying to do it for the notoriety or for, the publicity. We're just trying to do it so that our travelers can be a part of the greater narrative of changing this conversation. All right. I feel like it's very much a collaborative process. And so for us, socially conscious is about making sure that people understand that not only from a financial perspective, an environmental perspective, but where really are we having the most impact? A lot of people can think that their dollars are going toward good, but they're not necessarily doing that. Transparency is key, right? We want them to feel like they're not just doing something and then being hands off, but that they're really a part of all of that. And I think that just honestly starts with conversation, like what you and I are having right now. It starts with this idea of creating dialogue and space, and understanding that socially conscious is really, that's the foundation to us. It's about really having a deeper awareness and understanding by learning about what someone else is going through, and what role we can play in making things better. We don't need to be the best, but how can we be better a little bit every day? And I think India, the Indian subcontinent, and South Asia in general is one region of the world where we can very easily feel, especially from a Western perspective, how we can make a difference, because there are so many things different from our lives. And so we're able to have an impact, hopefully, that goes beyond what we know. And so to me, socially conscious is really about awareness and conversation and engagement.
Mm, thank you. I also would love to talk about, I know that you work in Bhutan and they have recently reopened to tourism, which has been so amazing. Like I've seen all the buzz about people who have been,
Yeah.
waiting and waiting to go. Maybe some people didn't even realize that they had been, isolated this whole time and really did just begin allowing travelers back in. And in the past, they have really focused on sustainability as well as creating a balance between tourism and preserving their culture and offering really authentic experiences.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, they had a sustainable development fee that tourists paid to travel in the country, which was a daily fee. And they have increased that quite a lot as they've reopened. And so I would love to hear about your experiences working there, the new fees, and how you think that's going to support the tourism development in Bhutan as they reopen.
It's an interesting conversation because what the SDF, Sustainable Development Fee, used to be around $60 to $65 a person, and now it's over $200 a person, and that's per day.
Mm.
So you think about, okay, if someone is traveling for 7, 10, 14 days, they really are introducing or reintroducing a model that places an emphasis on this sustainability. It's a joy. It is an absolute delight to see our clients back in Bhutan right now, because especially because it's not just us having services on the ground. I mean, these are our friends, these are our colleagues, this is family members for us. So throughout the pandemic, it's not just from a perspective of a sale or a business, but it's also about the livelihoods of our communities that we're supporting. So the conversation around the SDF has been interesting because the government implemented this, with the hopes of making sure that people that are traveling there are very much understanding the dollar, what their dollar means when they're experiencing this country, right? Bhutan has always been a destination that has more structure, right? You can't have independent travel. You can't arrive on your own. You need to work with an authorized company. They already had those parameters in place to try to limit the impact of the Western world on their country. And with this, though, it is it's introducing less opportunity in a way for these former guides or hotel operators or proprietors. Because for now, yes, the doors have reopened, but less people are going to Bhutan because of the cost. Ones that used to be able to afford it now need to really look at what this increase means. So I feel that I'm excited to learn more at the end of the year when they conduct their GNH survey or their gross national happiness survey. The government conducts this every year, and they poll certain communities in Bhutan to really determine what is making people happy, what brings them joy. And during the pandemic, they tried to do this, but it was more limited because they had less access to resources into the outside world. So at the end of the year, when they conduct the survey, I'll be curious to learn more about how the locals respond to this SDF and if that will actually change the government's ideas and ways of increasing their profit margins to assure that the country maintains that level of sustainability.
Yeah. There's so many interesting things in thinking about how that works. And I can only imagine, like, there's so many different elements to the conversation. But like you said, in the absence of travel, obviously, I think, especially for so many of us smaller operators who are so connected, like you said, to inbound operators, to our partners on the ground, that they really are family. And when we saw that we weren't bringing travelers there, I think many of us felt a lot of despair for not being able to continue to support those communities. Like you said, I mean, it is family. It goes beyond a business. And we, especially when you're trying to create such personal experiences for your travelers, that takes being so connected to the places that you're traveling. And so I know for me, that's really where this podcast actually came from, was the idea that I knew people like yourself would be really wrestling with, how am I going to continue to support these extensions of my businesses on the ground? How can I continue to have a positive impact if we aren't traveling, with no idea the long-term nature of what that would mean? And so I think it's interesting to think about how these fees can be a positive, can be a negative. Like, they're really meant to limit tourism, which I think is amazing because it's such a unique destination. We don't want mass tourism to be there because it will completely destroy why we're going there. I mean, much like many destinations, this is a conversation we could be having about every destination in the world. And like you said, how will this greater fee limit, will it limit too much tourism, and then will it actually kind of be counterintuitive to what they were
Right.
trying to create? So yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see how this model and this shift works in the country. And like you said, what maybe after a year of having it in practice, what that means. And but I think it's really great because it also, the thing that you said is it makes people keenly aware of what their dollar is doing at a destination.
Right. Yeah.
And a lot of times, I think, especially as independent travelers who might not be traveling with a group or a company, we're not really thinking about as much about where that dollar is going. And when you have to just like hand that over at the
Yeah.
beginning of an experience, you're like, oh, wait, let me think about why I'm doing this. Where is this money going? How is it impacting the destination? So I think it's such an interesting country to think about with sustainable
Yeah.
tourism.
It really is. And like you said, to see where this model develops and where it goes. I mean, I was in Bhutan right before the pandemic, and they were in really deciding where they're going to put in this rim road, this larger road that can accommodate larger vehicles, right? No more 12, 14, 16 passenger. What if we have larger buses? What if we accommodate bigger tour groups? And that was a big conversation at the time because they were saying, well, this is going to have a bigger impact though, right? If we're increasing our infrastructure to support this, then we also need to be prepared for the amount of people that are going to come in and utilize this infrastructure. And are we going to have the hotels? And are we going to be able to offer the same level of service? And what impact will it have sustainably on our country? And for right now, they tabled that. And so they really want to see now as they reopen and how things develop, if that still is if it's the right decision. And
Mhm.
so I'm interested to see how that dialogue continues too.
Yeah. And if you bring it back to that aspect of thinking about transformational travel, there's something about the like limited access or the intentionality that it takes to travel there and this like dedication to the journey that
Yes,
amplifies the power of the journey. And so
absolutely.
it's like there's built-in magic through all of that process as well.
There is. That was beautifully said, and I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, yeah, I think that's part of the mystical nature of me wanting to go there too, is just like, only so many people get to have this experience, and not in a bucket list way, but like in
Right.
a real spiritual and a like, I don't know. I've always, even since I've been younger, been really intrigued by indigenous cultures and places where people haven't been before. Like I always imagine like people going into the Amazon for the first time in Papua New Guinea and like getting to see places almost as if like a living museum, right? Like the
Yes.
way things have been for so many years without all the impact of, colonization and modernization. And it's like we can glimpse
Yes.
what it was like to live in a time that maybe was idyllically more peaceful in my mind or something like that. But I feel like to me, this taps into that space as well.
It does. And I believe that there's this ebb and a flow as to what intrigues travelers about Bhutan. Someone like Anthony Bourdain will go and visit, and everyone, if their interest, right? Oh, Bhutan, tell me more about this landlocked Himalayan kingdom. And wow, I didn't realize it. And then when they start to really look into traveling there, they do realize that you need to be very intentional on where you're going. Oh, I didn't realize there's only a few airports where you can arrive. And I didn't realize the amount of airfare that's required to arrive in Paro. And I didn't even realize that the pilots that operate these flights have to go to a very special flight school because the airport is so dangerous from a categorization because of where it's, placed in this valley in the middle of the mountains. And then just the logistics of reaching the country in itself really prepares you for something when you arrive. And then when you do ultimately land in Paro and you walk outside and you go, this is really like nowhere else in the world. I am open and ready for this journey because I don't have anything to really prepare myself. And to me, that's part of the beauty of traveling to Bhutan.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. My wanderlust is like completely fueled. I already had this wish on my list, but now it's ever growing. Well, I would love to move in to talk a little bit about female travelers. And I know, especially my audience, this is something, we talk a lot about safety in travel. We were also talking a little bit about transformation. And I think something in the same conversation is discomfort.
Mhm.
And we often think, there has to be some level of discomfort for that growth to occur. Um, and so when you're talking about female travelers and talking about both discomfort and danger, I would love to just talk about where you think that comes into the conversation and how that impacts female travelers.
Sure. Oh, it's a loaded question, but let me you just let me know if I keep going on this one
Okay.
because I feel like this is quite in depth. So I say in the book often there's a fundamental difference between discomfort and danger and statistics and sensationalism. And I think that those words get used a lot, especially relating to women traveling across India and the Indian subcontinent. And I am one who's really trying to change that narrative. As someone who's been to India, I can't even tell you how many times at this point. I consider it my second home. I have traveled in personal capacities, professional capacities, by myself, leading groups with my family. So I can honestly say that I have never had an experience where I felt that I was in danger. Was I uncomfortable? Absolutely. And there is a big difference. I think as females, often we are taught that if we're uncomfortable, that it must be warning us of something. And it could be, right? Intuition, we should always listen to that. But I also feel like sometimes we're told a story of something and that plants the seed for what we believe is the truth.
Mm.
And I think that that relates a lot to India. There might be an international news making tragic event. And as awful as it is, the people and travelers, especially females, that is what they cling to because that is what was that's part of that narrative, right? I keep using the word narrative because I think it's really powerful in this context.
Mhm.
So I think that when they travel, they go, oh, am I unsafe? Someone is looking at me, for example. In India, staring is very common, but it is almost never from a place of a threat. It's from a place of curiosity. And so we start to then, how you start to tell yourself a story of what's happening and it's not necessarily true.
Mhm.
And so I think that I'm not here to, of course, speak for every woman, and I'm not here to minimize the experiences of what another woman may have gone through. That's certainly not my purpose. But I also feel that a lot of women are hesitating or they're not visiting this part of the world because they're afraid of what they've heard. And so I feel like there are absolutely ways, and I'm trying to engage more women who have had positive experiences in this country and in this part of the world, because I think it's important to have a dialogue that's different than what we hear and also what Indian women and what locals also feel is also very different from a foreigner. And I have these conversations so much with my own family, right? I'm married to a man from Delhi. We have these conversations a lot. And with other females and my colleagues that are women there, how they were raised, the environment they're exposed to. There are also differences between locals and foreigners and how they are perceived to be to others. And so I feel like this is definitely a country where women are more hesitant. They want to feel more prepared. They want to feel safe, which can absolutely be accomplished. And I don't want that fear or anxiety of what they feel is a bigger context to stop them from going.
Mm. Thank you. That was such a great introduction, I would say, to that space of conversation, because like you said, there's so much that could be said, but I think that is a beautiful place for people to begin to examine if they do have any hesitancy or reluctance to travel to the area. Like, where is that coming from?
Yeah.
Is this, like you said, is this a narrative that they have internalized from one source or another without really understanding where that came from? And I know for myself, even I will hear it in my own thoughts. And then I'm like, wait, why do I feel this way? Like, I actually don't believe it to be true, but I know that somewhere inside of me at some point, this was a story that I took in and is still a part of my subconscious about the region. And I haven't, like I said, I haven't been to India, but I spent 6 weeks in Thailand. And, there was also some conversation with people about me going and traveling as a solo traveler, as a woman in Thailand, and like, what will my safety be? How,
Yeah.
and I think it does come to play in a lot of places, is if women are setting out to travel around the world, there's a lot of concern of safety.
Sure.
So but I think it is interesting to ask where that concern is coming from, because I think if we really start to unpack it, where we realize it's not even our own fear,
That's right.
which is really interesting when you're like, when you come to that place.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're right. And there's a way I think that we can experience a destination where we're not, there's a way that we can do it where we're open, where we're prepared, where we recognize, okay, India, even for the most seasoned traveler, is a very complex country to navigate. I mean, even after however many times I've been there, I still have a private driver available. I still make sure I have my team available. I arrange my itinerary and my visit in a way where I know that I'm going to be safe. I'm going to have support. I'm going to have advocacy. But all of that, you can still have a profound experience within that planning sphere. I think also there's this disconnect sometimes where it's either all here or all here. I'm going to go and just have this experience that isn't really planned, and I want to be in the moment, or I want to have everything prepared for me. I want to know where I'm going, and it can be a little bit of both,
Mhm.
right? You can have the structure in place to know that you're supported when you're visiting a country like India. But India is India. It's going, no matter how much you're trying to disconnect from it, it's going to be there. And whatever you resist always persists. And I say that often to our clients. The faster you ease into India, the easier it's going to be for you, because it is, as they often say, an assault on the senses. Okay. But that assault on the senses can also be beautiful if we see it from a different angle. If we don't see it as something that's so harsh, we see it as something vibrant. If we don't see it as something so chaotic, but we see this sense of community, right? We can always see a different angle from the lens of what we're experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. I also always say travel gives you exactly what you need. And
Yeah.
like, you can have a group of travelers together all in one place, and every one of them will be having a completely different experience, because we all are our own individual beings experiencing a place, and we're going to have different emotional responses based on our own experiences. And I think that's one of those incredible things, is that and I feel like India, from the people I've talked to that have traveled there, the like lesson and the teaching that
Mhm.
it gives you is really, can be so powerful. And like you said, especially if you come open and knowing that you are going to be uncomfortable, and know that that discomfort is where like all of the magic is
The
within the
magic
experience.
happens.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I love that we were able to dive into that so much, because I think that is going to be really, I think, impactful for those listening. I would also love to talk about, I know that you have been recognized for some of your work in a project focused on literacy and fair trade, empowering women. And these are spaces that, for me, when I travel, I really love to focus on learning about that in an area where I'm traveling. So I would love to hear from you what a little more about this initiative and why it was important to you.
Yeah, so this started really when we launched our company. This was one of the first initiatives that we felt we have as part of our company. We have a giving back program, philanthropy. So a portion of all of our sales go back to one of our organizations that we support. And we just felt like there was so much we felt that was, especially at that time, where the women were, it was more of a staged element of where people would go to see, oh, let me go see these indigenous communities, or let me see these women empowerments or these NGOs. But really, when you dug a little bit deeper, you still saw that a lot of them are still managed by men. They still had the same type. How are the women being paid? They're not being paid fairly. there was not a sustainable operation in place. Were the children of these women actually was their education being paid for? Were they going to school? So I think for us, it was first taking a step back and really saying, we're going to dive a little bit deeper and see which organizations are truly lifting women up and offering them an opportunity to support themselves and their families. And part of that was through literacy, right? I mean, India is absolutely one of the most, when you think of it in sheer numbers, it's one of the most educated countries in the world, right? One of the largest English language speaking countries in the world. And so they have a very high level of education there. But a lot of these communities get left behind, especially ones that are poor, as we often see, across the globe. So we really wanted to go in and try to change the model, lift women up by having women in places of management, where women are running these NGOs, where women are able to connect with the women. The confines and the structure of patriarchy in India make it difficult often for women to feel like they even have a voice, especially ones that are raised in these communities where they're seen as second-class citizens, which is still definitely prevalent in parts of India. And so we wanted to go in and kind of just change that model a little bit. And also have men come in who really were wanting to partner with us, who wanted to be a part of the change, who didn't simply want to be in positions of power but really to get on the ground and continue that conversation, right? So to us, it was more of a holistic and a collaborative, attempt to rise up. And so by doing that, we've been able to go into some of these communities in UP, Uttar Pradesh, which is a state in India, MP, Madhya Pradesh, and kind of talk to these women and have these children be educated at a level where they understand. And that leads into what we are very much supporting right now, which is the PAD project. And so we are a proud supporter of them and their initiatives across India. And, this idea of, a girl should, if she has her period, she might miss out on school. And then if she misses out on school, she falls behind. And then if she falls behind, then she just stops going to school. And then she might get married at a younger age. She might be having children at a younger age. And then her options are very limited in these communities. So we feel like, a period, as they say in the movie, a period should end a sentence and not a girl's education. And so by going in and educating these girls as to what a pad is, what menstruation is, menstrual health education, that brings empowerment as well to the understanding of their bodies, their understanding of saying no, of body autonomy, and allowing them with that power and those resources to then not miss out on school and to be able to have a higher, graduation rate and to go on. Because in a lot of these communities, Christine, they don't even think of higher education, right? It's not something that is a goal for them. Their goal is to get married and have families, and to support their husbands and support their husband's family. So we are really trying to go in and make a change by partnering with these NGOs and make sure that these young women are literate, that they're getting an education past 7th, 8th grade, that they have the appropriate pads and menstruation and education and resources to continue on and to really, really change that conversation, because there is still a big stigma in India.
Oh my goodness. I feel like, okay, sidebar for a whole nother conversation that we could be having. This is also one of my, I guess, places of passion and impact in travel. And I think when I first heard about period poverty and, what this looks like across the world, and even in the US, which I was very surprised, there are places where there isn't adequate education and access, and it does impact what it looks like for girls going to school. And it's, for me, this was kind of epically mind-blowing to think about girls having to miss 1 week of school every month and how far that puts them behind, and then how this really supports the patterns of the patriarchy, and it then becomes easier for girls to just not go to school. And then because they haven't gone to school, like you said, then they're now getting married younger and supporting their families, and it just kind of keeps that system in check almost.
Absolutely.
And the freedom that provides. And I've had conversations with a woman in Uganda who has really worked hard to create change in her community. And I had Celeste Morgans from Days for Girls on the podcast. So I love that you brought this into the conversation. And for listeners, I would just highly encourage you to take a moment and see how tourism and gender equity and period poverty are huge components
Absolutely.
to this conversation.
Absolutely. It is so deeply rooted and interconnected. And even beyond this place of education, right, or patriarchy, you also even think about just the basic hygiene, right? If these women don't have access to these products, they're using old rags, they're using leaves, they're using things that cause infection, right? It becomes more than, even greater than something as fundamental as an education.
Mhm.
I mean, now we're talking about something where now she has to go to a male doctor who doesn't understand what she has. I mean, there's, you're right. It's so deeply rooted. It can go on, and we just really want to be a part of making sure that these communities understand the impact of something as simple to us as it may seem is having menstrual products and being aware of what that means for ourselves and our communities.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, thank you so much. This conversation is going to be just like my favorite part of my day. I'm very sure of it. So
Me
I'm
too.
so
Me
happy.
too.
Well, I would love to. There was one more thing on my list of things I wanted to talk about. And this, I think we've already tapped into it a little bit, but the idea of the responsibility of travel companies to offer sustainable pay to service providers. And I think this really um, began with the conversation where we're talking about how connected we are to our service providers. Like, I think this is something maybe we are inherently doing or working to do as smaller operators who have this deep connection with the people we're working with. But across the larger industry, why do you I would love just to hear your thoughts on how this is so important, and how, as maybe even as travelers, how we can understand that that higher cost has such a positive impact that we should be willing to pay that in order to create sustainable living wages for the people that are showing us their country and hosting us in their space.
Absolutely. Because we all love a good deal, right? But at what cost? And I think now in this kind of post-pandemic landscape, these companies are slashing prices to stimulate this crippling economy, right? Which I understand. And across the world, across the globe, we see this. I think though what many people don't recognize, and it's unfortunately it's a developing practice now, very much in South Asia, and from speaking with some of my colleagues as well in South America, and I'm sure in other parts of the world, where the companies are basically going back to these SPs, these service providers, and they're saying, okay, well, here, you used to pay you $100 a day. Now we're going to pay you $20 a day. Take it or leave it, right? They've had no income for the past 2.5+ years. So they have had no way to support their families. So for them, they will take the $20 because $20 is better than nothing. And $20 will at least allow them to put food on the table. But it is the responsibility of us as travelers to look at what and really ask questions of our tour companies and our travel companies. How are you supporting the people who have been most affected during this pandemic? I know for myself, I just did not take any sort of salary at all during the pandemic. And I gave all that money into a fund to help support our SPs because I know that they needed it more. And we had resources here in the United States where we were having access to funds if we needed to, right? So I think that the greater conversation needs to be, oh yes, we like to say that we only spent $500 on this, but who is that really affecting? Most of the time, it is not the travel companies. They're not going to be the ones taking less. They're going to be finding ways to negotiate, and I say that with air quotes because it's not really a negotiation. It's more of a take it or leave it. And so they feel like if they won't, somebody else will. It can get complicated for travelers because even if you ask these questions of the company that you're working with, they can very easily be dishonest, right? They can say, oh, this is our diversity and inclusion policy. This is our sustainable pay policy. This is how we operate. But you never really know, right? You're just going based off of their word. So what I encourage travelers to do is when they're in these destinations, as they're working with these companies, just have some light conversations with your drivers, with your guides, with your service providers, with your transfer representatives. Really learn about, are they happy working with this particular company? What have been their concerns? You're going to learn and discover very easily if they feel content, if they feel like they're being supported. At least I know that at Sodha Travel, we always make sure that not only are our SPs being provided, but are their children being provided for? Do they have what they need? Do they have enough food? Do they have access to an education? Do they need a laptop for remote school? What is it that they may need, and how can we figure out a way to make it happen? Because to me, it's not just about us, it's about the greater good. It's always about the greater good. And so I think that as we are seeing these incredible hot flash deals coming at us left and right, let's just be mindful as to who is really being affected at the bottom line.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Thank you. I was also reminded of a conversation I had with Marinelle de Jesus, and she works a lot with porters and creating more positive conditions. And one of the things she says is, like you said, you can think that this is the experience because it's being painted by the operator, but when you're there on the ground, look around and notice, like,
Right.
how are porters being treated? How are your local guides being treated? And don't be afraid to be the person that says something about it, to ask a question. Like, I think as travelers, we sometimes feel like there's this huge barrier between us and the people providing services for us. And even because sometimes it feels uncomfortable that they are providing the service for you,
Right.
and it should feel uncomfortable. And if it feels uncomfortable, then that's when you really need to ask the
Yeah.
question, which is such a hard place to be. And I will even admit I've definitely like let myself off the hook in that space, and really regretted it later. But yeah, like there's just so much room for conversation. We'll go back to that space. Like, this is where it all begins, is conversation, and it's okay to have it, and it's okay to say the wrong thing, and it's okay to like be uncomfortable, and that's how we can create changes. And I think empowering travelers to be a part of that process is actually going to be how we solve the problems. And I also would encourage them to think that they're not going to take down a company because they asked a porter if they feel like they're being treated fairly, or like, you don't
Right.
even have to ask that. Like, what, you can find other ways to engage and inquire and just learn. And also, I think for me, that's so important because I don't want someone to feel like they're serving me when I'm traveling, even if they're serving me. Like, I'm their guest. I actually want to feel like they're hosting me, and that gives them the ability to share of themselves, which, going back to like both of the foundations of our companies, is that connection. And so it's the minute that you ask that question, you engage in meaningful conversation, you have provided that person so much value in their own story and the way that they get to share with you. And then all of a sudden this becomes, not a fully equitable exchange, but it can become on the road to an equitable exchange.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Well, before we end our conversation, which I don't want to, but we
I
will anyway,
know.
I would love for you to just take a moment. I know we've alluded to Go Girl Guides as you were talking about some of the points that are in the book, but can you tell us a little bit more about what our listeners can find and where they can find the book?
Absolutely. So GoGo Guides India can be found on our website, sodatravel.com, and that's where you can purchase a signed copy from me if you'd like. And it's also available on Amazon. It's available as paperback, and then also as an ebook. So you have the option for both of those. The book is really, it's 450 plus pages of everything from cultural curiosities to destination inspiration. I highlighted, this is a book that focuses on North and West India. And so I spotlight 20 destinations and 5 national parks and break down everything from my recommended hotels and experiences, day trips, where to dine, where to drink, where to shop. And then, of course, part of the book focuses on these cultural curiosities of India, the patriarchy, the caste system, what to expect from a budgeting perspective, local transportation. I wanted to offer some insight into the background of the play that you are about to be an active participant in, but then also have you be inspired by some of these destinations and go beyond what you might know from a guidebook. And so I hope that and I share stories of my own experiences across the country in the past 2 decades. And I hope that that is able to resonate with readers. One of the greatest gifts that I've received since publishing the book earlier this year has been when women have reached out. They've bought the book and they said, I've always been afraid to visit India. It's been this destination that has always been high on my list, but I just felt this anxiety and this uncertainty, and I was not sure if I felt prepared. And through reading about it and having conversations, and I encourage all women to reach out with me if they want to have a conversation about India. I will talk about it with you, share my experience, answer your questions, offer insight. I'll be fully transparent. But I do hope that it is a resource for women to be inspired and encouraged to visit the country.
Yeah, thank you. I love how you said that providing context for the play that you're about to be a part of, because this is something I have really been speaking about and trying to bring into my company as well. And actually have been working to design a 3-month immersive program before you travel, because I think that
Wow.
context
Yeah,
is so important. And I feel like it's one of the ways that we can be the most responsible and have such a positive impact is if we really know where we're going, what we're going to be a part of, what our role is as a traveler, what the role of tourism is in a destination. Like there's just so much that we can learn before we travel that allows for us to have such a much more meaningful experience. So I love that that's kind of the story and the space that you've created with that book so that people can have that, because it enhances your own experience so much when you have that richer understanding of where you're going, why you're going, and what it will mean as you travel there.
absolutely. Yeah, yes.
So the last thing we have is just a few rapid fire questions. So I'm
Let's
going to
do
jump
it.
into those in the conversation. What are you reading right now?
I'm actually rereading Shantaram by Gregory David Roberts right now because the series just came out on Apple TV. And so as I am engaged in the series, I'm going back and rereading this book.
I love reading before watching, reading and rereading. So I'm
Yeah.
of that person as well. And
Yeah.
sometimes like read, watch, then reread, figure
Right.
out what was different, if I care or not. I don't know. Probably spending too much time on that. What is always in your suitcase or backpack when you travel?
A shawl or a wrap, always.
Yep, I agree. To sojourn is to travel somewhere as if you live there. Where is a place you haven't been that you would like to sojourn?
Japan.
What do you eat that immediately connects you to a place that you've been?
Well, I am half Italian and I was raised with an Italian mother. And I spent some time living and studying in Italy. So I'm going to have to say pasta.
Mm. Who is the person that inspired and encouraged you to set out and explore the world?
Can it be people? I would say my
Sure.
parents. I mean, my dad was the pilot, but my parents gifted me with this love of travel. And we always heard growing up, the world is just a plane ride away. And that really gave us the ability to venture out and have experiences outside of our comfort zone. And for that, I am very, very grateful to my parents.
Thank you. If you could take an adventure with one person, fictional or real, alive or past, who would it be?
Oh, wow. I would love to have a conversation with Buddha. And I
Mm.
would like to have that conversation in modern day.
Wow, that would just be. And I think that would be appropriate.
I
Um,
wouldn't need to speak with Buddha. We could just sit next to one another, gazing into each other's eyes, or in a state of meditation. That would be fine too. But to
yeah,
be in that presence would be pretty incredible.
yeah. Well, obviously, this podcast is about celebrating women in the industry. Who is one woman in the travel industry you admire and would love to recognize in this space?
I admire a woman in India named Ritu who started an organization called When in India Tours. And I've worked with her for many years. And I admire Ritu because I feel she speaks for many women in India and in other developing countries where you have more barriers to create and to be an entrepreneur and to be a trailblazer. you have less resources. You may have less support. And for that, I admire her tenacity, her grit, and her passion. And I see a lot of that with my own colleagues at my own offices and with other women leading organizations across the subcontinent. And so I would like to recognize Ritu for being someone who is really out to blaze a trail in the best way possible.
Thank you. That was beautiful. And I hope that we can find a way that she can hear that and receive that as well. Well, thank you so much for such a beautiful conversation. I think there's so much that people can take away, and I'm so grateful for having you in this space today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to have this really meaningful conversation with you about so many facets of the travel sphere right now and our souls and how to bring everything together. It's been beautiful. So thank you, Christine.
Thank you.